In this video, the front of my house gets a much-needed upgrade. I borrow some design inspiration from a professional door manufacturer here on YouTube. I'll try out a new finish and a new process, and at the end, I think the results are gonna blow you away.
Wow, that actually looks like amazing.
Building this exterior door presented me with a number of challenges that are quite unique to this experience. The first of them is that it needs to stay stable, since a warped door would cause all kinds of problems with weather sealing and being able to operate it efficiently. At the same time, the species of wood that you select has to be one that can stand up to all of the sun and wind and rain and snow that we get here in southern Alberta. So for this project, I decided on cherry. Not only does it go really, really well with my home and all of my decor, and I think it's beautiful, which is also helpful, but it's also something that I think will stand the test of time. Now, my hardwood supplier happened to have these boards that somebody sold to them. They'd been sitting in this person's garage for 30 years. So they were sold as 8-quarter boards, but in fact, some of them were actually even 10-quarter boards. So there was a fair bit of cleanup that had to be done on the jointer. And I ran into a unique problem here as well, in that my jointer wasn't long enough. So I had to set up a roller stand, used a straight edge to double check that it would work okay, being nice and even with the outfeed of my jointer. From there, it had to be cut down to length and size and profiles routed. There was a lot of time on the router in this project, and that was something new for me. Usually the router is just the odd little thing, but it was actually an essential part of everything. From there, I had to figure out where my spacing would be and mark a center line so that I could go over to my workbench and start drilling for dowels. For this project, I'm using the Jessamine doweling jig, and I have a video on it and how I store it, which I'll link down below, but this jig was really, really helpful. I sourced some 1/2-inch diameter by 5-inch long dowels that I am using to hold together the entire structure of this door. When you start building something like this that is going to be so exposed to the elements and really take quite a beating, one of the big things that you have to realize is that this is a big investment of your time and also a pretty big risk. One of the nice things about spending the money to have a professional company build a door like this is if something goes wrong, you can reach out to them. Now, on the flip side, this door, I think all in, including some of the special tooling like the router bit set that I needed, came out around $1,000 or $1,200, which is coming in around the price of a moderately priced, just pre-manufactured door. So really, it saved me a boatload, but you do have to keep in mind the stress factor here. Just like Black Forest Wood Products did in their video, I'm using Titebond 3. It's waterproof. They haven't had any issues with it, and I figure if it's good enough for the professionals, it's good enough for me. So you see that I am right now just gluing the dowels into one side and let that glue dry and make sure that all the squeeze out is dealt with. And then once all of that is ready to go, I don't have to deal with one side of the glue up, and I can just start pulling all of my lumber across, putting the glue into those holes and sticking my pieces in, making sure that they're all aligned, seated nicely and square, and then clamping things down temporarily until I am done this section here. Then eventually what I began to realize is it would be way too difficult at this point to try doing the other side. So I just clamped it in place to let this side dry up. And then about an hour or two later, I was able to come back and glue up the other side. For those of you still with me at this point in the video, I want to let you know you rock. Something I wanted to put out there is my new YouTube members community where you can support what I'm doing here while getting some awesome perks like behind the scenes updates, early video access, plan discounts, and more. If that sounds interesting to you, I hope that you'll take a look, but truly, no pressure at all. I'm happy that you're joining me for this YouTube journey. With the door frame all glued up, I had to turn my attention to these pieces of wood for the raised panels that will be going in the frame. This absolutely maxed out the miter saw. As you can see, I actually had a little tiny piece that I had to deal with. And then it was over to the bandsaw where I cut off a little bit of the excess that made it so it wouldn't fit through my planer. And then what I did, I removed the blade guard off of my jointer and just ran this groove. This groove is a little bit beyond halfway. And what it allows me to do is to put this sled on the jointer underneath it and to run a few passes through the jointer with this sled until the opposing face is flat. Then I can flip it over and remove that ledge that I created on the jointer. And this is how I'm able to create perfectly flat and parallel faces on a board that is significantly bigger than my jointer. As I cut the pieces down to size on my table saw, it was now that I began to get a little bit worried about beginning my biggest routing operation I think I've ever used. I don't think I've ever used a bit that is this big on this many pieces of wood, this size. Fortunately, my 2.25 horsepower router that I have in this table, it did manage to make it through all these different pieces of wood without ending up burning out. It definitely bogged down quite a bit, and so I had to take things in small passes and work my way in a little bit further. But over time, as I just took my time and was careful after, man, it must have been a couple of hours of routing these parts, both sides, all the way around. It was done, other than this one piece that I found that had a knot that needed to be stabilized. And so I couldn't find any black pigment other than some printer ink that I had, so I mixed that in. It didn't mix well, but it mixed well enough. So using the heat gun to remove any bubbles and let things really soak in there, I let that epoxy dry overnight to seal everything up, and then ran a couple more passes with that one panel over the router bit just to make sure everything was clean and tidy. And then from there, it was over to the sander to begin sanding everything nice and flat. Now, this here was actually a part of this whole process that I liked even less than all the routing that I had to do. And what that was the sanding by hand of all of these raised portions, the profile here. It was absolutely miserable, so I will spare you most of that. Once all of that was done, I went and grabbed my track saw because I needed to clean up the edges of this door, or the ends of this door, and cut it down to final size, which this was great at. Now, this is a case of do what I say and not what you see me doing. I do not have my track saw hooked up to dust collection, nor am I wearing a dust mask. The amount of dust that this kicked up in my shop, definitely dust mask, dust collection. It is an absolute must, or at least do this outside. But anyways, from there, I moved on to more sanding, this time of the frame, and I just used my sander to clean up some inconsistencies where it turned out that because I hadn't run all of these pieces through the thickness planer at the same time, I just ended up that little bit off and had to sand them down so that they were flush. Then it was a lot of hand sanding, and then more hand sanding and more hand sanding in order to get all of the little curves and indents and insets nice and smooth and sanded, and all the edges broken to prepare us for the next part, which was going to be installing the raised panels. Just like Black Forest did, I'm using glazing tape here. Between the glazing tape itself and then also the trim pieces that will be on the inside of the door, I do think that these raised panels are going to be held in well. This is also going to ensure that they are able to move as they expand and contract with the seasons, while still remaining watertight and airtight for the best seal that I can achieve while having these panels in an exterior door. So overall, I'm very happy with the way that this turned out. A little pro tip for you here: when you're fitting all of your panels, make sure that you mark on the end grain somewhere that you're not going to see the order and orientation that you intend these to go in. It'll just prevent any mishaps or any alignment issues if you're a little bit off. But because I did that, everything went really, really well here. And then I moved over to a new product to me. Again, it's the same product that I saw Black Forest using in their video, and that's this Osmo UV oil. I did 2 coats of it on all the surfaces of this door, and then later on, after he had cured For about 7 days, I took some of Black Forest ceramic product and applied a couple coats of that as well. So while all of that was drying, or actually I guess after it had dried, I went and started working on my trim pieces. So I just used that same router bit that I'd been using to do the other side of the door, but on smaller pieces, and just trimmed off the excess and then began to work on all of my miters to fit them in place as tightly as they could be. I also found it helpful to use just a little bit of weld bond and then some brad nails to hold everything in place. I started off with pin nails and I just wasn't impressed with the holding power. I wanted to be able to really get the gasket material pressed in well, and I found that there just wasn't enough holding power on the pins, so I switched over to the brad nailer. Yes, it left more noticeable marks that I had to fill in, but I just feel more secure in the job that this did. Then I moved over to my block plane to clean everything up. And of course, at this point, one thing I hadn't considered is to get everything flush, I would then have to also sand everything flush, and that sanded through the finish that I had applied. So after I sanded, I then put the finish back on and did another 2 finishes. And from there started putting on my bottom seal, and apparently was really, really focused. Come on, like, is that really how you look when you concentrate, Steven? Man. One of the disadvantages when you're new to something like this is not knowing some of the rules. Thinking about things, I suddenly realized we need a bevel on the leading edge of this door. And of course, I've already got 2 coats of finish on the one side and a coat of finish on this side, but the bevel's necessary. So I'm gonna use my track saw set to about 2 degrees and maybe 3 degrees. And we'll just nip off the end here and go from there. Now, I am a firm believer that there is always another way to do anything in woodworking. And so I want to hear from those of you that maybe don't have a track saw, the creative folk who can just figure out a way to jerry-rig something. If you had to put this bevel on late stage like I did here, what tool would you use? Would you use a circular saw and guide, run it through the table saw? I'd love to hear from you, so be sure to leave a comment down below. With the door done, I then started on the door jamb, and really the door jamb is both simple and surprisingly complex. Like any other woodworking project that uses rough sawn lumber, I had to rough cut it down to size, run it across the jointer and through the planer, and cut it down to size, and that was the way that it started. Here's where things started to get a little bit interesting. Because I was working with 4/4 lumber here, I am creating kind of a faux rabbeted section. So I'm taking a piece that I milled down to a 1/2 inch thick on top of a 3/4 inch piece, making sure that everything is evenly spaced. And what this is doing is this is kind of creating that area in the door jamb that the door is going to sit against. And so once everything is all glued up, I'm going to run a groove in this rabbet here, and that is for the door's weather stripping. This piece, I did have a thicker piece for my header portion of the jamb, and so I'm actually just letting my saw struggle through this very deep cut, and then finishing off my rabbet, and it actually leaves my groove in place as well. And then I actually used my miter saw's trenching feature to get this little bit here cut off so that everything could nestle in the way that it was supposed to, and seat together. It was a little bit of a challenge keeping things square, and I know some people might be wondering why I'm just screwing things together. Is that going to hold? Well, again, Black Forest says that they did it, and if it's good enough for them and they say it works for them, who am I to argue? So everything just got trimmed up and screwed together, and yeah, it worked out well. I don't know. If you have a better idea, if you have a better way of doing this, if you'd glue it or use some sort of fancy joinery, I would love to hear what you would do. But for me, it's just all screwed together. Now, it is possible that when it came to cutting those grooves, I should have switched over to a full kerf blade. The thin kerf, while the weather stripping did fit down in there, let's just say that it was quite the workout trying to get it into place, and I'm pretty sure it may end up impossible to actually remove this weather stripping when the time comes to replace it. So another example of do what I say, not what I do. Definitely double and triple check the size of your groove and how your weather stripping fits down in there. After that was done, I moved my attention back to the door and I rigged up this jig to create my hinge mortices on both the door and on the door jamb. This worked really well, actually. I quite enjoyed this process, despite what the look on my face yet again would make you think. And then when I went over to the door jamb, I did have to modify the jig just a little bit. It wasn't sitting down properly. And so I figured out my measurements and chopped off the amount that I needed to get rid of in order for everything to sit down properly into the jamb. I did the jamb off camera, and then from there started putting the screws into the hinges, drilling out beforehand with this self-centering drill bit, which is absolutely awesome, and put the hinges in place. These are ball bearing hinges, which I've never used before, but wow, does it ever make a difference. And from there, that's the door. I didn't film the installation, and I'm glad I didn't, because it had me sweating and panting and a little freaked out. But man, this thing is amazing. I love it. It has transformed the front of my house. And so if you ask me, yeah, if you're up for the challenge, it might just be worth putting in the time and effort to build your own door. Well, folks, until next time, make sawdust, not excuses.